Welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Reenergize Professional Coaching. We appreciate you listening in and learning with us. The stories and leadership tips you hear will help you become a great leader. Listen intentionally. Now, to our host, Sean Olson.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast. This is the podcast where you hear the real stories of people just like you who become extraordinary leaders. You'll learn valuable tips from their lives, tips that you can apply to become the best leader you were created to be. When leaders are intentional, lives are changed. I'm your host, Sean Olson. I am an author, speaker, business owner, and of course, podcast host. And if you'd like to help us right now, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification button, make all the algorithms happy. We would be happy with that too. We're glad to have you with us for this episode. Today, I'm excited to have a great conversation with Kelly Mackin. Kelly is a researcher. She is a best-selling author, and she is the CEO of Motives Met. And you all are in for a treat today with a rich conversation around you, believe it or not, because we're going to tap into you and your motives today. Kelly, welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast.
Thank you. So excited to be here today.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And I know we met about a month ago. We were kind of connected by a common friend, and it's always fun to get connections that way. So, Kelly, we welcome you to the show and look forward to hearing about Motives Met and the great assessment you have developed to really help people understand who they are in a richer way. But to start with, we begin every show with a simple question of just kind of walk us through your professional journey and leadership lessons learned along the way. Who's Kelly?
Oh, well, I would say my journey actually started all the way back to when I was a kid, really growing up witnessing my mom, who was really this amazing woman trailblazer for her time. She was senior vice president at a huge ad agency, and I saw her go from at one point thriving at work to complete misery at work.
Wow.
That was really difficult to watch because at one point work really lit her up. It gave her such purpose and she was so confident from it. And then to see the power switch that work could actually create such burnout and mental and physical distress was really interesting because I kind of got to see both sides of the coin, what was possible both in a positive and negative way. And unfortunately, I kind of grew up with the mindset that that's just how it was, right? You got to toughen up. It's tough out there. And so when I ended up in the corporate world, I unfortunately followed in the exact same footsteps. I found myself at an ad agency that I call like Mad Men for modern times. It was whiskey before noon to deal with crazy clients. It was screaming matches. It was micromanagement, terrible leadership, very toxic, all the things. And it took me hitting some pretty ugly lows before I woke up and got clarity that really well-being at work is a right. It is not a privilege. And we need to work in a way that is sustainable. So that really led me to a completely different part of my career, diving into research and coaching. And eventually it led me to the work well-being movement. And I knew that I wanted to be part of it. And that really started with me going, well, what the heck even is work well-being? Because the world doesn't really seem to know. There's a lot of noise, not a lot of clarity. And that research journey just started the book and Motives Met and where we are today.
So that's awesome. Thank you for that. What invigorates you about research, right? Because a lot of people are like, that's just not me. I can't sit and research things. So not only research, but research of humanity, which is where you are.
Yeah. Well, I think about it as finding insights that are actionable, because I think research can feel unrelatable and sometimes overwhelming if people don't do a good job of giving really amazing insights that then you can take and go do something with to make your life better, the people around you's life better. So I love the way that research has the capacity to do that when you do it well.
Yep, absolutely. So you end up going into research and looking at this whole aspect of well-being, which led you to Motives Met. Just briefly tell us about the book, and then we'll start talking about the assessment.
Well, the book Work Life Well Lived is really based on all of the insights that came out of our research to really go, well, what is, thriving at work? And we know that thriving in our workplaces and our work lives is interconnected with all this stuff that we want, right? It leads to engagement and motivation and connection and greater retention. So we went, this is the goal, but we don't have clarity of what the goal is, which means it's going to be a heck of a lot harder for us to get there. And the world has so much advice about
Yep.
what is quote unquote the answer or the golden ticket. If you're a leader, you'll see all sorts of articles. These are the three things your team needs most. If you want a culture of well-being, it's about belonging, or no, it's about flexibility. And even research can't seem to make up its dang mind
No,
about
not at
what
all.
employees need and want most. They say, employees leave because of a bad boss. Well, no, it's because of a lack of growth or they don't feel appreciated. So we went, okay, it's great that work well-being has become such a hot topic of conversation, but we're kind of drowning in information, but starving for real wisdom. And what we discovered is that there are actually 28 human needs, what we call motives, that are at the heart of our ability to thrive at work. So it's not about any one of these needs. It's not about the top five. Because what we also uncovered is that, of course, what you need most to thrive at work is going to be very different than what I need most. That well-being is
Absolutely.
personal, it's not universal. There is no universal hierarchy of needs. Sorry, Maslow really got it wrong.
Yeah.
It's about really figuring out what each person's hierarchy is. So we went, this is a huge mindset shift that has all sorts of benefits when we all grasp this. And that's what led me to write the book, because we wanted to get this information out in the world to really help people and help leaders create workplaces where people can be well and perform well at work.
Fantastic. So I'm a firm believer in assessments, right? So we're obviously working with leaders across the world in different ways and through coaching and leadership development. And one of the things I always tell them is no single assessment can tell you who you are, right? We're much more complex and rich than that. So having multiple assessments makes a big difference. So just talk for a little bit. I know you're familiar with like personality assessments that go to like the Myers-Briggs, more leadership-based assessments, maybe like Strength Finders and DISC, things along those lines. What lens or angle does Motives Met assessment bring that those other ones don't?
That's a great question. I mean, like you said, I think there's such value in different assessments depending on what your goal is. And when we use these assessments well, it gives us this greater self-awareness and other awareness, right? That helps
Yep.
us have better relationships and reach our goals and do all this good stuff. But for example, personal strengths is one of the 28 motives. Whereas Strength Finders is all about finding your strengths, which is amazing. But we find some people go, I actually right now want to be pushed to be challenged. I really
Yeah.
need to innovate and be challenged. I actually right now don't want to focus on my strengths at work. And so everyone, again, is so unique. What our assessment really focuses on is what are those driving needs right now, whether it's work-life harmony, whether it's growth or future success or fun at work,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that our work lives, our careers are going to happen in seasons. What is
Yeah.
most important to me today is going to be different 10 years from now. So, unlike some personality assessments that will just kind of tell you, hey, you're an extrovert or an introvert, this assessment is very much about focusing on what you need most now. Because if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority.
Absolutely. So I like how you articulated that. So it makes me think of a question out of this. So we use DISC a lot because we like to see leadership tendencies in people. And even with personality tests, typically they're never going to change, right? You can take it when you're 20 years old, 40 years old, 60 years old. Typically, there may be a slight variation, but it's going to be the same. It sounds like with the Motives Met assessment, because it is about what do you need now. So maybe you're in a new job, new station of life, that we could maybe take it every 3 to 5 years, and there's going to be some variation. Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely. I still, out of my top 5 motives, I still have 2 that have remained the same over the last 5 years, which are autonomy and flexibility, because those are very much tied to my values and my sense of self, and freedom is just always going to be so important to me. But my other 3 motives have shifted a little bit based on where I am right now and what my goals are and what my personal life is too, because that's another thing. You become a
Right.
parent or you move across the country, that's going to affect what you need at work to do your best work and to be most fulfilled at work. So it's trying to take all of those things into consideration and not saying again that it's about this one thing, because that gets really difficult for younger people. We also find going into their careers for the first time, of like they're focused on, oh well, I think this is what I want and need. I got to find my purpose. Well, unfortunately, we find that you could be living your purpose, but if your
Mhm.
other top motives aren't doing well, it
Right.
unfortunately doesn't matter. You're going to find yourself stressed or burnt out or unhappy. So you need to kind of be open minded to say, hey, these 28 needs are about what thriving at work is. I'm probably going to need to ebb and flow between a lot of these in my work life. And how I do that is so important. And that's taking a very different perspective that we find is really empowering for people.
Fantastic. So you have 28 motives. I'm curious, when you started your research, I assume the pool of motives was much larger and you had to kind of categorize and pull in. Do you remember, like, originally, the original draft, how many motives there were?
Oh, I think I want to say there were over 60. And
Uh-huh.
then we also had to test, different statements. And we did, for people listening, we created this framework that makes these 28 motives easy to grasp. They kind of fall into 10 overarching buckets or motive domains. And you can see it on our site, which makes it, again, it's easier to kind of grasp these 28. But we also were looking, we tested other things. We looked at emotion, we looked at stress, we measured all sorts of things to really figure out what is the answer. And what we found is that underneath these human needs are our human emotions. So at the end
Mhm.
of the day, getting these needs met is about how we want to feel at work and how we don't want to feel at work. And so
Exactly.
when you find people on your team or your employees stressed or burnt out, it isn't just about overwork. If you need autonomy and you're being micromanaged, ooh, that can lead to burnout big time. If you need to feel you matter and appreciated and you feel invisible, they're going to be walking out the door if that's something that's a top need for someone. So
Yeah.
the emotion part is huge, but it's kind of underneath these motives.
Good. So let's talk about the practical use of the tool. So half of our listeners are working for someone, half of our listeners are the entrepreneurs and things. So we have both aspects there. But thinking about the person that's the employee, there's a huge benefit in taking the motives met to understand either why they feel really good at work or why they may not feel really good at work, to see where that plays out. But if I'm an employee and I take motives met and I realize this company or this particular role is not hitting the mark, how can I use this tool to go into my boss in a one-on-one? Like, what's the impact of that? How would I use that?
That is so important, is that communication piece, because this assessment really gives you new language and a way to more clearly advocate for what you need and talk about it. And you get a great report with the assessment. You don't just get your top 5. So you get these amazing questions and tips and all of these resources to kind of help you on that journey so you can make better decisions. You can set better boundaries. And we say that we all have a story behind these motives, no
Yeah.
matter if they're thriving or they're suffering. And when we share these stories with the people we work with, we just get to know each other a heck of a lot better on a human level, authentically. And that's going to help you work better together. That's going to help you and your boss understand each other more. So, just even that understanding piece alone is such a huge benefit.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive into it a little bit. You were gracious enough to send me a link to take the assessment. So I've taken the Motives Med assessment. You talked about the 10 categories. And so I'm looking at this and I see success and company connection and meaning and more. Those buckets, the 10 buckets then that the 28 motives fall into, Is there like a connection in those buckets? Does it matter if my answers are everywhere? Should they be focused in a certain area?
Well, we found from the data that those were more likely to be correlated. So essentially, yes, the research kind of placed these motives in these different buckets around the wheel. But what's really interesting is that motives that are further apart or across from one another can tend to hold more tension. Not all of them, but
Hmm.
you can find more friction between them. And that friction can happen internally or externally. For example, work life harmony and future and growth are in different places, and we find that people internally can sometimes struggle with, or I'm sorry, work life harmony and future success are on opposite ends, and they go, I need to do all this work to reach my goals and my future success, but I also need work life harmony because my family needs me, and whatever the case may be of why they need that. And so figuring out how to make peace with that tension and again get your top 5 healthy is what can be a little bit tricky sometimes. But we can also see this happen on teams. So for example,
Hmm.
security and innovation are on different sides of our
Yep.
framework. And we found in a workshop, it became really clear one person on the team, very innovation driven, wanting to take risks at this startup. Someone else, much more risk averse, and they would butt heads a lot. And they came to understand that that's just who they are and what they
Hmm.
value. And then they were able to kind of talk about it and work through it. So it's interesting to see where your top 5 kind of fall on this motive map, where your teams fall, how you're similar or different from others, and kind of use that as a way to, again, bring up really good discussions around how to strengthen these needs at work for yourself or on your team.
I love that. I love that. Well, let's give our listeners kind of a glimpse at some of the different pieces of it. So I'll just talk about mine for a little bit because I have it in front of me here. So with my top 5, they are all kind of in that realm of company connection, meaning, and advancement. So it's the upper right side of your wheel, the way that you guys built that out. But I'll just jump to my top 2 motives from the assessment were prestige and passion. Just give a little glimpse at what those words mean, but then what that says about me.
So prestige was a really interesting motive that came from the research because it's not as common. But we found that that need is really around wanting to feel proud. Pride is like the number one emotion. They're really wanting to feel pride in the work you do and who you do it with. So for
Mhm.
someone that may manifest it working for, a household name brand, or it could be working for a startup with a mission they find valuable, or, being an entrepreneur in their
Yeah.
own company and wanting to feel, really proud of the work that they do. So that, given you have a few motives in the company connection domain, that shows just how much you care about creating an environment and being part of an environment that you truly feel that you are proud of. And
Yeah.
passion is part of the meaning domain, which is kind of right next to that company connection domain. And we found passion and purpose to actually be a little bit different, even though there's some similar overlap, which is why they're both in the meaning domain. But passion's a little bit more around just really wanting to like the work you're doing, just to feel that you're not sitting there day after day, spending your hours doing something that doesn't feel right in your heart, right? That
Mhm.
emotionally you feel fulfilled by the work you do every day.
I love the descriptions of those. And I would agree with that. And the purpose one is my number 5. So it's still on that top 5 list. It's in there. So the one that's the outlier, the single piece on there, the advancement part, is the aspect of growth. So what is the growth articulating?
Well, growth is just articulating that you want to continue to advance. And that could be for different reasons. And that's why it's so awesome to reflect on why are these for you in your top 5? And then again, hear it about from other people. Because we find some people with the growth motive, for example, they're just kind of like lifelong learners, that's
Yep.
a value and they're always going to be driven towards growth. Whereas someone else, for example, that growth could be tied to a big goal. I'm shooting for that promotion next year. I'm shooting to get to that next mark in my business and revenue. And it's driven by a very specific goal versus more of kind of who you are as a person. So what would you
Yeah.
say for you? It kind of falls more into.
Yes.
Both.
Both.
We're both.
It is because I'm a lifetime learner, and I teach and preach all the time that leaders are learners, right? So we're always learning and growing and developing. And one of my greatest joys, so that goes back to that passion and prestige, is building a business that's actually truly impacting people.
Mm.
And so when I look at the top five and the way you're describing them, they are not singular. They're totally circular and inclusive.
And interconnected. Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
what it's so cool when you create your motive story and you do weave in the top five together, like how they play off each other or where sometimes they do have friction. But that's what's so important for us to look at these top driving motives holistically, not just about do I have work life balance in my life or not? Or am I headed towards the next promotion or not? You know, we kind of say that we reveal the ugly truth of work well being because it isn't that simple. It is a little
Right.
bit more messy and multifaceted, but it's thinking about how do you get these collective motives to thrive together? And where do you maybe need sometimes to make peace and go, okay, I'm going to let maybe work life harmony be a little bit lower and I'm going to focus now on this big goal. But in 6 months, once I'm through that goal, I'm going to focus a little bit more on this motive. But that's you really being proactive and strategic about your health and happiness at work in a way that's really tough to do in the everyday grind of life if we
Yeah.
don't kind of have tools like this that almost force us to stop and reflect and do that work.
I like that. So I know we talked about this in the work context. I'm just curious because it's kind of intrinsic and it's about motivations. Is this a viable tool like in the realm of a marriage, in the
Mm.
realm of family, relationships, things along those lines?
Yeah, we find that people just find it interesting in general to share who they are. And that could
Mhm.
be from any assessment, right? Whether it is more of your personality or your work style or what you need to thrive at work. But we do find that sometimes what people need at work can be different than what they need outside of work.
Sure.
But that's why there isn't this one size fits all. Some people outside of work, for example, are very social and have community, are involved in all sorts of stuff. So, to be honest, we'll tell leaders sometimes not everybody cares a lot about belonging. Not
Mhm.
everybody cares about having a best friend at work. Not everyone really drinks that
Right.
Kool-Aid. But someone else might have moved to a new city. They might not have a family. They might not be really involved with a ton of stuff. And working from home and feel like at work they're really missing that connection and belonging and that's really motivating to them. So it's again trying to understand who we are both at work and outside of it, and those can either be similar or different.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love this. One of the things we always encourage in our one on one coaching is the need for leaders to have effective one on ones with the people they lead, right? And truly understanding them. And the phrase that we use all the time is you have to know your people well enough to know when they're not okay,
Mm,
right?
God,
To
I
be able to
love
see it, to know them well enough. And I'm listening to all of this and I'm like, what a rich tool for a one-on-one between leader and direct report to truly understand one another. It has to be both directions, right? Because you want that direct report to understand who you are as a leader and things like that. So I know that you all inside your organization are now doing workshops for companies and stuff. So talk a little bit, just transition away from the assessment alone to what you all are doing for companies around Motives Met.
So it's really fun to go in and work with teams or with leadership teams, either or, and really dive into people's motive results. And you can do this in different ways. Again, sharing our motive stories is so impactful, like you were just even talking about in this one-on-one setting, but it's also really helpful for teams to hear this about each other. And especially in today's more remote world, we're just not getting
Mhm.
together enough to kind of have that conscious connection. So, having this time to have people share what's important to them at work and why, and how those things are doing, and what the team can do to support is so important. And that's part of what we do in workshops. But another really cool thing we do is we'll look at the team and go, what motives are really rising to the top for the team? And what's working and what's not, what's building up these motives, what's blocking them. And we get people in smaller subgroups and really get them to roll up their sleeves and think about what are small things, big things, habits, mindset shifts that we can do to elevate these things at work. And then also kind of build them into our system to make sure this isn't a one and done. That was very important to us with these insights, is to give a lot of research and action steps to where this becomes embedded in your culture. That when you say,
Good.
hey, we want an awesome culture on our team or in our company, what that means is looking at these 28 motives and going, they're healthy or they're thriving. Because at the end of the day, we talk a lot about people first, but people
Right.
first means putting your people's needs first. That's what that means.
Absolutely. Yeah. I like the team approach. I like the workshop approach as I'm thinking about that because we lead workshops all the time around leadership teams. And I'm thinking about these motives. And so you're diving into even the team motives. And I like that. What do you do if you run into a scenario? If you run into a scenario where everything's great and it's aligned, they're going to be successful and thrive. What do you do if the team finds that they've just got this total mix? So there's not alignment in motivations, or maybe even worse than that, there's a person on a team of 6 who just doesn't fit that team. How do you navigate those disparities?
Well, that ties into a concept that we really drive home with leaders and teams, which is embracing motive diversity. And, we talk a lot about inclusion at work and creating inclusive workplaces, but we find this is one place that can really go missing because certain motives can be put on a pedestal. Maybe purpose is really kind of put on a pedestal in your company or in your culture, and other motives can be dismissed or judged or misunderstood, right? Fun is frivolous, or work-life harmony is a luxury. And when we develop this motive mindset, part of that is embracing this fact that we all are going to be different and that we might have some motives that overlap and we're going to have ones that are different, and that we need to respect other people's motives just the way we want ours to be respected. Because we find that even if we're not completely conscious of it, there can be a lot of judgment that comes. What I think is most important is what you should think is most important. And we tend to really show up in that way more than we realize, with that bias. And sometimes, the question isn't how do we connect, it's how do we limit judgment. And
Yeah.
so we kind of take that stance. We go, it's totally cool. It's totally fine that these are more important to you and these are more important to me. But if we do have motives that have friction, let's talk about it. Where do we need to compromise? What do we need to do? But if we don't have those conversations, then there's going to be problems that we're not able to solve. So we say it's really about learning to live in the tension of these needs well and doing it together.
Yep. Well put. And what I really like about that whole thing is the results of the motives met assessment's not going to say whether I should or shouldn't be on this team, whether this team's going to be successful or not, because it's not about the tactical. It really is just tapping into the person and setting them up for success by giving them opportunities where their true motives can be satisfied.
Absolutely.
I like that. And what I really like too is people hate conflict, right? They avoid conflict across the board. But when we understand, like Kelly, if you and I were like on the same team, we work well together, but we're just not meshing, a conversation around this and being open and vulnerable enough to say, well, here's where I'm coming from. And well, here's where you're coming from. It's those light bulb moments where I'm like, oh, okay. So when Kelly does that, I understand why she's doing that now. She's not being mean. She's not against me. That's just who she is. There's so much richness in developing that relationship.
Yes. And it creates, when you take the time to do that as a team or in your relationships, it creates more of that brave, psychologically safe space that, again, just isn't always there. It's kind of tough sometimes to walk into your boss's office and just say, oh, you're micromanaging me and I hate it. Versus if your boss kind of goes, well, what's one or two ways you could get more freedom in your job that would really matter to you? That's a much more inviting way to kind of initiate that discussion, or even on a team to say, hey guys, I don't feel you appreciate me. Instead, if you're in like a workshop like this, which you can also do on your own, and someone says on the team like, hey, let's talk about how everyone feels most appreciated here. And maybe when they felt like they haven't gotten, felt like they were valued in the way they'd like to be valued. That opens the door for these tough conversations to happen that need to happen, like you were saying, because we find motives can tend to be a missing conversation at work, and that silence costs us big time. Like you were
It
saying,
does.
leaders in the one-on-ones, if you
Yep.
don't want to have the exit interviews, have the stay interviews. Talk to
Yep.
someone about their motives, because they can have all the growth and purpose in the world. But if their top motives are work-life harmony, fun, security, and those aren't met, they're going to be leaving. So talk about them now and have an easy way to talk about it, which is kind of what the assessment in our framework and insights helps people do, because it's tough as a manager to be told, get to know your people as human, talk to them about all the things that matter. But you're kind of like, I'm so busy. I have all this stuff going on. How am I supposed to do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. We're going to have links in the show notes for people to see the website and things like that. But just quickly, because I'm sure a lot of the listeners are like intrigued by this and what are my motives and what would that look like for my team? What is your organization doing individually and collectively for teams where they may be able to tap into your resources?
So we say we kind of have four big parts of our platform. The first is our research and insights. Everything stems from that. And we give a lot of free resources on our website and our blog and our email newsletter that just kind of help you think about these 28 motives and how to lead them better. The second is the assessment, and that's a big part of what we do, of course. And if you purchase the book, you get a free code to check out the assessment yourself, which is really
Nice.
great. And the third part of our platform is our motive experiences. So those are the workshops. We do a lot of offsites. It's really cool at an offsite with your team to dive into this stuff. People seem to love that. And then the fourth part is our motives masterclass. So this is where leaders really get the chance to go, how am I going to lead with motives in mind? And we have a 5-step roadmap that really walks them through how to do this, gives them the tools to do it, gives them amazing questions to ask their team related to these 28 motives, and have those one-on-one stay interviews we were talking about.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the four big parts of our platform.
Great. So that masterclass, is that like an online self-paced thing? Is that in a group with you or your team facilitating? How's the masterclass play?
So we've done it thus far just in organizations, but there has been a lot of people saying, hey, I'd love to just do this for me and my team of 10. So we are creating just a cohort that's online that you can sign up for that should be launching by June.
Fantastic. This is great stuff. I love assessments. I love understanding people. And this is just another layer of richness to truly understanding who people are. So thank you for sharing all this with us. We finish every episode, Kelly, with the same question. So I'm going to ask you that question right now. What is something our listeners can do intentionally today to be a better leader?
I think the big one that I hear from other leaders working with us that really has empowered them in a new way is shifting from this one size fits none mindset. So get to know your people as an individual so that you can coach, inspire, and lead them based on who they are as the unique human being that they are.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, listeners, check out the show notes below. You can buy the book, tap into their website for the assessment, and follow up on there, because I know it'll make a huge difference when you understand your motives and why you do what you do and how you find that peace and success. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us on the Intentional Leader podcast. I hope that your organization keeps growing and impacting people as they understand who they truly are.
Thank you. This has been amazing. I feel like we could talk for hours.
Exactly. All right. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Reenergize Professional Coaching. Be sure to see the show notes for links to Reenergize Professional Coaching and links to contact our guests. Now, hit that subscribe button so that you are alerted with every new episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast.